Hello and welcome to the Horror Homestead. My name is GiBi, and today I'm going to be doing a reaction video to ID's Fantasy's newest video about Candy Cadet. She's been teasing this on Twitter for a couple days, and I've been very excited because she seemed to imply that she did not believe that all of Candy Cadet's stories are about molten MCI, which is a theory that I also believe. Personally, right now, just to level with you guys, I think that the story where the man has the orphans and then they all get combined at the end, I think that's about molten MCI. The other stories, I'm sure that she's going to end up playing all the audio from Candy Cadet, so if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm sure you will in a minute when she talks about it. One of the stories about a snake, I think is actually about Mike killing Elizabeth and then trying to put her back together in sister location, and then I think that the story about the girl with the keys is actually about Charlie the puppet trying to save the MCI kids. I'm actually going to talk about this in the video I'm going to put out in, hopefully next week, basically coming soon, where I think that Charlie actually had the ability to use her remnant to, save one of the kids, to, almost bring them back to life. Like William did, his little stabby, and then they're not quite dead, and she could have revived them. But instead of doing that, she gave them each enough remnant to possess their animatronics. So I think that Key's story is about Charlie not saving them. I think that Orphan story is Molten MCI, and I think that Snake story is Mike with Baby and Elizabeth. So I'm going to see what she says. I know that she's going to talk about the other Candy Cadet stories from the future games. I'm going to watch those. I'm going to see if I have anything really to say about those. If you know my reaction videos, you know that I don't just sit here and watch the video play. I'm going to pause it a lot. I might talk over her. So I always recommend that you go and you watch her video first. You go and you see what she has to say. You listen to her arguments laid out perfectly coherently without me pausing and talking over them. And then you come here to see what I have to say about the topic. So, without further ado, all Candy Cadet stories explained FNAF theory by ID's Fantasy. It will be linked in the description.
However, while certain interpretations of Candy Cadet's stories are widely believed, not only do I think important aspects of them have been largely overlooked, but also that the main messages of most of Candy Cadet's stories and the important lore insight they give have been almost entirely misinterpreted and put aside. The Candy Cadet stories
I think that what she's referring to is that most of the community thinks that the 3 Candy Cadet stories from Pizza Simulator are all about molten MCI, and so I hope that that's what she's disagreeing with. Because I also disagree with that. Do you disagree with that?
After, with a common theory being that each of Candy Cadet's original stories are all about the same event. Because of this, I'm going to tackle the Pizzeria Simulator stories as a group and then move on to the new ones. So what are the original Candy Cadet stories about? On a surface level, the stories are pretty simple, if a bit strange. One story is about a young woman sealed in a room with 5 keys and a furnace. The 5 keys could each unlock a different door outside her room that had a child trapped behind each, but she was only allowed to take 1 key out of the room. The woman used the furnace to melt the keys together so she could take all of them, but all that did was make it so rather than being able to save one life... What's
interesting about this story, and again, I interpret this as the woman being Charlie and her being able to save the 5 MCI kids, is that this is the same game where we learn that fire will nullify the effects of Remnant, and so why in this little metaphor allegory is she melting the keys together? Because theoretically, as we should learn, that would make them not work at all. Whereas we know that it works to the ability, to the effect of them being able to possess the animatronics. So it's a bit of a contradiction there. Either the fire stops the remnant, which is the end of the game, or the fire has no effect on it. So basically, I think that Scott should have used a different metaphor for the keys being, brought together. Maybe she would have, she could have sewn them a blanket or something.
Save none. Another is about a boy with a hungry snake who found a box of 5 kittens. Despite knowing the snake might eat them, he didn't want to get rid of the snake. And while he knew that if he fed a kitten to the snake it might be satisfied, he couldn't choose which one and left the snake's cage open when he went to bed.
That's so obviously Elizabeth, or Baby, I guess.
Put the remains of the kitten back together and then put the kitten back in the box.
Which is what Mike does in Sister Location.
And bring happiness to 5 orphans, but feared what would happen if a burglar broke into their homes, so he adopted them.
I have something to say about the burglar later, you guys will see.
His home and killed all 5. Because he couldn't afford more than 1 coffin, he sewed the bodies together and buried them, with the story ending by saying there was a knock at the door. Immediately, it's pretty easy to see why many people connect all these stories to being about the same event. What with how many times 5 things and stuff getting combined into one comes up in every story.
That's
the usual
not
interpretation
what
I see is that they're about a theory called molten MCI, where William Afton combines the remnant of the original 5 missing children to create or put into the Funtime animatronics in Sister Location, which would later combine to become Ennard and kick Circus Baby out to become Molten Freddy. 5 things become 1, 5 dead kids haunt 1 pile of robot spaghetti. However, there are a few reasons I don't think that's what these stories are about. For one thing, only 2 of the stories are actually about 5 things becoming 1. The story about the young woman with the keys specifies she melted the 5 keys together to create a single one, and the story about the man specifies he stitched the 5 children's bodies together. But the story about the boy, snake, and kittens only ever mentions 1 kitten being eaten despite the existence of 5. Sure, 5 nights go by, but the story only ever mentions the 1, and even
I think that the Five Nights Going By is a reference to Mike being in sister location for 5 nights, because that's actually the only FNAF game in which Mike is there for exactly 5 nights. The other games are, FNAF 1 is 7, FNAF 2, if Mike is Fritz, is 1, FNAF 3 is 6, etc.
Specifies that the boy thought one kitten could satisfy the snake, which would check out given real-life snakes canonically don't eat much. The only place that
in real life snakes canonically don't eat much.
Things that are just flat out false, such as that sister location takes place at Circus
Brain
Baby's
rot
Pizza
or
World,
joke?
not entertainment and rentals. So it isn't a particularly reliable source of information. And honestly, if the stories were meant to be about William combining the spirits into one form, it would be pretty strange for each of the characters doing the combining to be so different from each other and from William himself. The woman was actively trying to save children while William killed them. The boy felt regret for letting the snake eat a kitten due to his unwillingness to stop it, while William doesn't seem to have regret for killing the missing kids at all. Though there are some cases where I could see William being the boy if the subject isn't the missing kids. Finally, not only did the man who stitched the bodies together actually care about the safety of the kids who died, he wasn't the one to kill them. There's an entirely separate burglar character that kills the 5 kids, much like William does in the actual lore. That isn't
someone who might break into a house, you say? Interesting.
To say that none of them could possibly be about or include the Molten MCI theory, but all 3 of them being about that, or honestly even the same topic at all, seems unlikely given just how different the stories are. In fact, I think there are explanations for each of these stories that fit the characters and contents much better. So what are these stories really about if it's not just the same instance of 5 things becoming one? Well, Pizzeria Simulator as a game was meant to tie up loose ends and give explanations for the story up to that point. It showed us how Charlie Emily came to possess the puppet.
Scott says, or not Scott, but the character in the game, so I guess Scott, because he's the writer, says that it's tying up loose ends in a satisfying way.
Even though she died outside the restaurant, and how William lured one of his victims. While some of the information we're given is less understood than others, shout out to Midnight Motorist, the lore we get in Pizzeria Simulator is all about filling in some of the gaps to wrap up that arc of the story. And I think that the Candy Cadet stories are similar, with each of them giving insight into different characters and events from the series in the lead up to Pizzeria Simulator. For example, I think the Key's story is most likely about Charlie Emily and her efforts to help William's other victims in FNAF 2's Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, and how that led to the spirits being around for Pizzeria Simulator. After all, the young woman in the story was sealed in a room, just like Charlie's spirit was sealed in the puppet. And just like there were 5 kids trapped in their own rooms, there were 5 kids killed by William Afton, just like Charlie was. And just like the woman wanted to save all of the children by melting the keys to their freedom together, leaving them all trapped instead, Charlie tried to help them in Give Gifts, Give Life, but all of their souls remained trapped for decades despite of, or because of, her efforts. This is where in my original...
So it's arguable, one of the reasons that I believe that William stuffed the kids and that all Charlie did was bring them to life is because it's sort of... It's thematically relevant if they would have otherwise died and, like, gone to heaven, if not for the puppet's interference trying to help, right? Like, based on this story we get, she's, like, trying to save them, hold them in her arms, but instead they come to life. So the idea that, like, otherwise they would have died, but she let them stay in the animatronics, which ended up being a bad thing because she's a child, is, to me, a very important part of the story. And so the fact that she had her remnant and was able to give them to them is important. If William didn't stuff the suits, if he just kind of killed the kids and left them lying there, then, like, what was the point of killing them? He just got, like, stabby murdery for one day. I think it's clear that he was trying to have this happen, but he's, like, bad at getting things to possess things, right? Because the only things that ever get possessed are, like, Fredbear, which is an accident, the puppet, which I don't think he intended, and then Baby. So I think that the MCI kids only came to life because of Charlie, but that William was intending on it happening. And so those 2 characters together, William and Charlie, form, like, this yin-yang thing where, the one guy did the killing, but couldn't lock them out of heaven, and the other character's a good person, but ended up being the one to do the bad thing. It's like a yin-yang symbol. Charlie's the white with the black dot.
Original video, I explained that this story gives additional insight into Charlie's efforts to help the kids, because the woman in the story apparently could have saved one of the trapped children, but because she melted the keys together, she wasn't able to. I suggested that this could mean Charlie may have been able to use her remnant to bring one of the kids back from the dead, as that is a thing Remnant can do. We see it happen with Michael Afton, where he comes back as a zombie, but is also implied to have potentially recovered in the scrapped Fazbear Fright story, You're the Band, where there's a Freddy's security guard named Mike, who knows a lot about hauntings and Freddy's, but also apparently looks like a college teenage kid in the year 2015. Maybe Charlie could have literally given life back to one of the children who were killed, but by trying to use her remnant to save all of them, they may have been anchored more fully to the realm of the living but remained trapped. However, I've somewhat rethought my position on this. I still do think that this general concept could be—
So that is what she just laid out is basically what I do believe. So let's see the counter evidence.
What the story is trying to imply, but I don't think Charlie was necessarily using her own power in order to make things work. The merged fates of the children via the merged keys of the story reminds me of Happiest Day, where only once all of the pieces of Happiest Day and the spirits are gathered can the spirits be released. And the culminating event—
So this, I hate that I'm not letting her finish, but so this, visually, let's look on screen. We have 5 things, and what they're doing is they're saving one thing, being Dave. So having 5 keys that she molds together and that doesn't work, I think happens before this, because this Happiest Day is her taking 5 things, molding them together, and it does work. So I think the not working has to come prior in the story. So I think that she tries to use her own remnant, can't save the kids, oh no, but in the end she uses all the kids to save Dave, which then lets them all go, which might have something to do with, like, shatter, scatter, victim, whatever. But I think that these are 2 different events. I think the molding of the keys is earlier in the timeline, and then Happiest Day is later, and they're both 5 things coming to save everyone, but it's, again, it's like she learned from her mistake. It's like poetry, a rhyme.
Event of that is giving cake to a spirit in Golden Freddy. There's a relatively popular theory that the crying child's remnant ended up split between all of the animatronics. And while I think he does primarily possess Golden Freddy, the fact that all of the spirits need to be gathered in the Happiest Day ending for the spirits to move on seems to imply their fates are tied together, just like in the Candy Cadet story.
So I do not believe that the Frights books are canon, but it's made pretty clear in those that if you are haunting something due to your agony and your remnant being tied to, like, a specific event or something, then the way that the spirit is let free is by sort of creating a happy memory for them, right? Like, Millie doesn't go inside and have Christmas with her family and instead is decapitated by Funtime Freddy. So the way that they solve this is by giving her a happy memory about her going inside and having a happy Christmas. So if Golden Freddy, if Dave had a bad birthday party where 4 people representative of the 4 Freddy's characters lift him up and he dies and he's crying, then giving him a happy memory where they instead give him a big old birthday cake and they're happy will release his soul. So I don't think it's important that it's a specific spirit. I think it's important that it's 4 people in Freddy's masks.
As such, I think it's entirely possible that Charlie wouldn't have used her own remnant to try and heal the missing kids. She instead used the crying child's remnant or memories. But rather than healing or freeing any of them from their mechanical prisons, all she did was bind them together in death. Either way, I think it lines up pretty well with the narrative that we're given. As for the others, the Kitten story is the one where I can most easily see the argument for its protagonist character representing William, especially since it seems to be a metaphorical retelling of the events surrounding Sister Location. A red snake chooses a kitten to eat while the boy turns a blind eye.
So the red snake is also explicitly said to be in a metal cage. So red snake, metal cage, baby.
William Afton left Circus Baby, who has red as a very prominent color, to her own devices to choose a child to kill. It just so happened that said child was his daughter Elizabeth, which could then explain the boy's regret and decision to kill the snake and put the kitten back together and in the shoebox with the others, which could then metaphorically represent the combination of the Funtime animatronics into Ennard, as Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Bonbon would amount to 5, just like there were 5 total kittens. However, there are a few details in this story that lead me to believe this story isn't actually about William, but rather his son Michael. After all, even if William was the one who told Mike to put his sister back together, the fact that the story says the boy was the one to do so himself, and that he specifically did so after 5 nights, stands out to me in the context of Mike being our player character in Sister Location. William isn't the one who spent 5 nights at Circus Babies, the one to claim the role of putting Elizabeth back together, or the one to play a direct—
So one thing I will say about the 5 kittens. Of the 5 kittens, let's say that one of them is Elizabeth. So that leaves 4 kittens. Well, that can't be the MCI kids because there's 5 kids in the MCI, not 4. I partially disagree. I'm a believer in molten MCI, which means I think that the original 4 animatronics were melted together and their remnant was used to power the Funtime, so it's not like Funtime Freddy has one child's spirit in it, he's just brought to life by some combination of the soul juice of all the others. But I do not think that when William did this, he had the remnant from Golden Freddy. I think he collects this remnant from the animatronics and not including Golden Freddy or the puppet. And so the other 4 kittens in the box would be the 4 kids that are not Cassidy or Charlie.
Direct role in the creation and escape of Ennard. Sure, he kickstarted the events, but Michael was the one to go through and do it.
He literally says, Mike's line is literally, I put her back together, just like you asked me to. So yeah, Mike did
want
it.
the snake to eat any of the kittens, since the only thing keeping him from saving them was that he personally felt too attached to the snake. If the boy were William, why wouldn't he want the animatronic he built with child-grabbing capabilities to grab a child? That would be exactly what he built Circus Baby for, so it wouldn't be a matter of pain to consider getting rid of the snake, knowing it might do snake things. That being said, technically neither Mike nor William were the ones to directly remove Circus Baby's endoskeleton, so the boy cutting open the snake to get the kitten out doesn't necessarily match either of them in regards to Circus Baby.
So, okay, well, I know that you watch some of these videos, so here's a point. Mike does literally open Circus Baby when you have to do the stupid number pad thing, and then her stuff opens, and then he like removes a little chip from her. So that's not literally removing her endoskeleton, but it is opening her up and removing something from her, which in my interpretation I believe to be like the AI that like allows her to be Baby as opposed to the soul taking over and becoming Elizabeth. But either way, he does open her up. So
I think the snake could potentially not just be a representation of Circus Baby, but also likely William, who was responsible for her creation. Michael clearly felt enough loyalty to his father to follow his instructions in sister location, even though the circumstances they put him in were definitely dangerous. So it seems likely to me that this story shows us Michael's arc in regards to his feelings about his father, and potentially implies that he may have had suspicions or some level of knowledge about what William was really up to. But while he initially turned a blind eye because he cared about his dad, he eventually had a change of heart, put his sister back together, and turned on his father, leading to him eventually being present in Pizzeria Simulator to assist in setting William Afton and his legacy ablaze.
So he does, in the story, the boy does know that if he leaves the snake, it will take a kitten. He just doesn't want to know which one, or he doesn't want to have to choose. So if the boy is Mike, then yeah, that does sort of imply that he knew that his father was doing something bad, and then he hoped it wouldn't hurt anyone that he cared about. So that is interesting if we're taking the boy to be Mike, which I do. So now that's now a characterization of Mike that we have to look into. Interesting.
And this leads into the last of Candy Cadet's original stories.
I mean, I don't like it for my own interpretation,
being
but
about
it's a good
William's
point.
former business partner, Henry Emily, and what led him to eventually set up Pizzeria Simulator in the first place. The story being about a kind man who brought happiness to children would make a lot of sense, considering Henry was one of the co-founders of Fredbear's and Freddy's, which brought joy to children, and the fact that the man lived alone could connect to the loss of his daughter Charlie. Now, regardless of whether or not you believe in the current lore that Charlie was the first of William's victims, as a Pizzeria Simulator, that was almost certainly the case, since it wouldn't make much sense for Henry to claim being the first one wounded by William's murders if anyone else had died first.
I also, okay, so personally I do believe that Dave died first, but I've recently discovered my interpretation of the Toy Chica's high school years cutscenes, that the descriptions of the deaths in that do actually line up with what many people consider to be the death order for the kids, where it starts off and the Foxy is already dead. That would be Dave already being dead. The first way that someone dies could very easily apply to the puppet. The second way someone dies is definitely Susie, and so if she's the first of the MCI killings after the puppet, then that lines up, and then it's just 3 back-to-back that don't really matter. Those would be the 3 boys, and then the last one is about someone being, like, brutally killed and beaten, and so that would be Cassidy, probably being spring-locked. So it does, to me, seem to make sense that Charlie is the first one that William overtly kills, again, not including Dave. People are disagreeing with this more recently. It's always been a thing, whether people think the puppet was killed like last or first or whatever. But Help Wanted 2 has a puzzle in which you're supposed to put masks in an order, and the puppet comes last. And so people think that that's supposed to indicate that the puppet is the last victim. I think that multiple indications of the puppet being first, like Henry's speech, and like I just said, it kind of fitting with Toy Chica's description, is better evidence than a cryptic mask puzzle. So that's what I think. And ID's Fantasy isn't really taking a side here, but she is at least saying that when Scott was making, not Ultimate Custom Night, when Scott was making FNAF 6, it was heavily implied that that was the intention.
As such, the man being alone without his daughter as of the time of the missing children incident would make sense, at least in the context of Pizzeria Simulator.
Yes,
whether
in the
or not
context
she
of
is
that
still
game,
the
it's
first
almost
victim
certainly the
overall is a
case.
whole can of worms I'm going to say for a potential later video for the sake of getting this video out anywhere close to on time. Anyway, another reason it seems this story relates to Henry is because of a particular line in the story that's echoed in Henry's recording we hear during the game's Insanity ending. The story mentions a man brought the 5 children together in one place, and Henry in the Insanity ending says that in order to help William's victims find rest, he has to bring them all together in one place. Yes. The 5 children are almost certainly a parallel for the missing children and the burglar who killed them for William. As for the man stitching the body...
Okay, so I guess this is when I have to talk about this. So, a burglar in this story being a stand-in for William. Now remember, Scott could have written the story however he wanted. It didn't have to be a guy in a house who goes out to get groceries and the kids get killed by a burglar. It could have been anything. This could have been a museum curator. This could have been a librarian. It could have been anything. These stories could be anything. And Scott chose to have William be a burglar in the same game as Midnight Motorist, in which one of the fan interpretations, one I happen to believe in, is that William is the footprints outside coming to take away an MCI kid. He would be like a burglar. He's breaking in. Interesting that in the same game it's possible that William is characterized as a burglar twice. Interesting. Maybe it's because Orange Guy isn't William and the guy who breaks into the window is. That's just me. That's just me being sassy.
I can see the argument being made that this would be indicative of the molten MCI theory. However, I don't think that's necessarily what this story is meant to be about. And not just because it would be a bit strange for Henry to be the one to mix the soul juice of the MCI kids into Molten Freddy.
Okay, I'm going to let her talk. I'm actually very interested because I strongly believe this is about Molten MCI. In the books, there's the one character who's like the police officer who, after they uncover that like the animatronics are possessed, he goes and he takes them and hides them in his basement because he's like, the kids shouldn't be alone. I have to keep them for myself. And obviously he's not like a Henry parallel because Henry is in the books and he's dead. But it is kind of an instinct where it's like, I don't know what to do, but maybe this is helpful. So let's see what she says.
If that's what's going on with him. Molten Freddy and the other characters in Pizzeria Simulator are much better represented by the final line of the story, where after the stitched-together child is buried, there's a knock at the door, which could metaphorically lead directly into the animatronics showing up in the back alley of the pizzeria for Michael to bring in. The thing is, regardless of how possessed or not Molten Freddy is by specifically the 5 missing kids, Molten Freddy's arrival at the pizzeria wouldn't necessarily account for the entirety of the children's souls.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I don't think that Molten Freddy is, because I don't think that Golden Freddy is in Molten Freddy, it wouldn't be the 5 kids. So,
in the bad ending of FNAF 3, we can see that if the spirits don't move on, the heads of the original animatronics still have their eyes lit up, implying the continued presence of the spirits. Even if some of their remnant was harvested and put into the fun times in one way or another, it seems as though at least part of their souls remained in their original animatronics, which aligns well with how in the book The Fourth Closet, even after the kids' remnant is put into the funtime animatronics, they still maintain control over the classics. Additionally, Henry would have needed something to inspire his insanity-ending speech, which he starts by saying he only now understands just how depraved William really was, before mostly talking about what William did to the missing kids and their spirits after they died. To me, it seems like something related to the missing kids is what made Henry aware of the situation and inspired his plan, and I think the potential spiritual remnants present in FNAF 3 would be able to do just that. After all, in the final newspaper we get about the location burning down, we read that items were salvaged and sold at a public auction. Since the endings of the game show the intact heads of the animatronics, this seems to imply that they didn't burn down with the rest of the building. Who's to say that Henry didn't somehow find out about and get a hold of them? He could have done so, discovered they were haunted, and then come up with his plan for Pizzeria Simulator. He would have then brought them together to what would become their one metaphorical coffin before the knock at the door of the other animatronics arriving.
Okay, so a couple things. One, obviously, like my personal theory for how this would happen would be arcade theory, which is that he's using video games because he's supposed to be Nolan Bushnell, who's a video game creator and also the founder of Chuck E. Cheese, and so he's using video games in order to contact the other side because the arcade machines that we see throughout the Freddy's games are very clearly possessed with Remnant, the same way that other things in the Freddy's building, like the paper plate dolls, are, and so that could be how Henry's communicating with the spirits. That's my theory. I don't even believe in it 100%, but I do really like that as a theory. So there's a YouTuber named Sire Squawks who, for a very long time, did not believe in Molten MCI, or at the very least he came to different conclusions. He came to a different conclusion, didn't like it, wanted to come up with alternative theories. And one of his theories is that the remnant from the original MCI kids was still present in the suits in FNAF 3, and that those were used to then build the Rockstar animatronics in FNAF 6. Somewhere in the game's description, and again, I'm kind of half remembering something another YouTuber said that they were built based on the original animatronics, the classics. Now, that can mean that their designs were based on the classics, or that their casing is literally the classics. So it's possible that if any remnant was left over in those suits from FNAF 3, that it's in the Rockstar animatronics. A counterpoint some people have to this is that it's not necessary to buy all the Rockstars in order to get the best ending, but I disagree. There's drawings of the Rockstars on the walls in your office in FNAF 6, which makes me think that the canonical path in that game would be getting all the Rockstars. So regardless of if you believe in Molten MCI or not, if you do think that there's any leftover remnant in the original animatronics, it could have been that Henry then bought those at the auction, built them into the Rockstars, had the Rockstars be in the building, they burned down too. So that would basically solve the problem that ID's Fantasy just had.
Just like the man in the story, with the stitching together of
With,
the
like, what
bodies
happened to
potentially
them, right?
representing the conditions being made right for the spirits to move on. As in the Key story, the keys to their freedom were combined into one as well. Of course, these are just my interpretations, and with how the stories are written, I can definitely see other things potentially being the case. So feel free to drop a comment with your own interpretations if you disagree, or consider subscribing if you do agree. Either way though, I find these interpretations to be particularly satisfying with how they give greater insight into the three characters that worked against William on behalf of his victims, all leading up to the culminating end of the game where we hear the stories told. But while that covers the original three stories, that's no longer where Candy Cadet stories end. Imagine.
Alright, so after this point in the video, ID's Fantasy goes on to talk about Candy Cadet's appearance in Ruin and in Help Wanted 2. I'm not going to go over that in this video because I don't have very strong opinions about those. So if you want to see the remaining 7 minutes of her video, you're just going to have to go over to ID's Fantasy's channel and watch it there. Thank you for watching. ID's Fantasy, if you watch this, thank you for making this video. You're one of my favorite theorists. I hope you're all nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you most admire, including ID's Fantasy and the plush that she's putting out. There's a link to my Patreon in the description as well as my merch store. Never lose sight of the things that are important to you, even if people disagree with your scare bear theories. And remember that Freddy stands for friendly, respectful engagement, discussion, and discourse yields success. If you're watching this the day it comes out, then tomorrow, Sunday, I'll be releasing a video going over the Fazbear Fright story Fetch. And if you're not watching this the day it's uploaded, I probably will be going over a different Fazbear Fright story this coming Sunday, because it's every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for watching.